it leaks out of our language and through our fingers when we type.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, I'll let you start going on what do you guys see coming so far in 2011. Of course, this is airing on January 15th, 2011. What do you see coming from this point forward? You've got I heard a big date coming up on January 18th where you predicted possibly another tipping point. Is that right?
No, it doesn't work that way. The January 18th date is related to the end of the release language
Okay.
that we're in now. We actually tipped over into a tipping point on November 14th.
Okay.
The week of November 14th, remember, we had an ICBM. Now, let's also stop for a second and define. You say, what's coming in 2011? Well, horrific joys and terrible chaos and doom and gloom and death and so on, lots of births and lots of happiness and lots of pain. It depends on where you are and who you are.
Sure.
So
Sure.
now here in the United States, we've got a particular situation, but let me back up and say that from November 14th onward, we've been in release language. This was a very atypical thing for us. We'd never had it. We had a tipping point on November 14th, which I argue still occurred on that date. But there are a lot of people that say, well, it actually happened on November 8th when the release language began with the ICBM that was launched off the coast of California by the Chinese. Don't let anybody tell you it wasn't a Chinese missile.
Yeah, that was always my suspicion. That
Right, and all of the other naysayers and so forth, and the arguments that they have against it are all misdirecting and using different tactics, and they're not debating any of the actual facts. So that began the release language. It did not overwhelm the building tension language, and basically we live in a. Let me stop for a second and give you a bit of background. We live in a dualistic universe. We are energy, but we think ourselves matter. This is the good, bad, all of that kind of stuff. We have a tendency to define everything as ones and zeros or in a binary fashion.
right.
So I did so way back when by deciding that there were two forms of language, basically, relative to the emotions being expressed. All of those emotions that are building tension that cause anxiety and silent acceptance of anxiety, fear, or even joy or whatever, but they work on your stomach and your solar plexus. So a building tension language is something that causes your stomach to spasm and tighten, your muscles to tighten, that sort of a deal. Whereas release language is where your muscles release and the language flows out. And so it could be the same kind of anxiety, but it's merely that it's being expressed as, yelling or weeping or whatever. So there are degrees of emotion attached to words built into them, and I was differentiating on different kinds of emotion as to being release and buildup, because humans in general, en masse, react differently to the various different kinds of language. I discovered this over 97 through 2001 as we watched the economic situation develop. In any event, in November 14th of 2010, we hit a tipping point at which point there was more release language being expressed than building tension. Obviously, there's always both being expressed because we've got a huge planet full of people that are just chattering away like mad.
Right.
Okay, so the release language, we've been into it since, it's been dominating since November 14th. That release language domination has been fed and kept fueled by all the WikiLeaks stuff, by all of the North Korea stuff, by basically all the weather issues and so on that we've got going now, where people are grumbling and expressing their displeasure or pleasure with the events that are occurring. And they're just doing it with release language. That really ends on January 18th through the 23rd, and we go back to a period where building tension dominates. And usually, or not usually, but in the past 10 years of our work, we find that most frequently, more often than not, at any given time, you'll find that you're in the middle of what we call crocodile teeth, where you've got a bunch of release language one day or maybe for 18 or 19 hours, and then the next day you're back to building tension and so on. So it's up and down relative to the two types. This time it has been very rare because it's been totally dominated by release language, and it's just kept going on and on and on. Basically, 63 days was our forecast beginning on the 14th of November. Now, coincidentally, in the end of January, we have a solar occurrence coming up as well. And the solar occurrence is based on this, what can be defined as the mega sunspot cycle.
Okay.
And it has an 88-day periodicity. It's actually probably 87.45 days or something like that. But basically, we can think of it as 88-day periodicity. So there was a big brouhaha on the sun on August 1, and you count 88 days. We go to October 27th, and we get a situation where there was all kinds of solar activity then. And the next end of the next 88-day cycle is in the end of January. It is coincident with our shift to building tension language, and I cannot say from our data whether it is the sun activity that actually causes us to go into building tension language or triggers it or whatever. But nonetheless, the two do occur about the end of January. Now, there's a long way of coming back and saying that our next big date is actually January 7th. While we're in release language, and while the release language is running at predetermined or not predetermined, but at a known rate of flow, our forecast showed that on January 7th, that rate of flow would increase radically, dramatically for about 25 or 26 hours beginning on the 7th.
Okay.
And so tailing off until early January 8th. So we expect some level of increased flood of release language to come pouring out on January 7th, which I think is what, like Friday or something.
Right.
Um, and probably it'll be economic, but beyond that, it's really hard to say. We have had all the economic problems that we'd seen developing. They're still ticking along here. Oh, also, let me back up. Sorry.
No
Our
problem.
our tipping point this time was unlike our previous experience with a tipping point. Our previous experience was September 11th, 2001, in which the powers that be engineered the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in an effort to force the populace of the United States into patriot reptilian mind mode so that they would go and kill people in Iraq and Afghanistan and other parts of the world without knowing that they were being dupes of the powers that be.
Right.
Okay, so that tipping point changed the whole planet. This tipping point on November 14th also changed the whole planet. It's just that it's taken 63 days for it, in this time, for it to become more majorly felt. Whereas in September 11th, it was a much more violent act that occurred in a much shorter period of time and had the effect of changing the planet. Here it was a whole series of events that are at a huge level, much larger. Arguably, the ICBM from the Chinese off the coast of the United States and also the at the time, the potential for rapidly escalating war between North and South Korea, both of those had higher emotional levels than the attacks on the Trade Center.
Really?
Yes, they did. Because of the potential fear levels, they just ratcheted up very high. Then there was all the confusion, which kind of flattened out the fear, and then so we faded into release language. So it is an entirely different sort of a situation. I'm likening this to teacups, okay? On September 11th, we had a teacup that was 100% filled, and it was turned over and spilled.
Okay.
And so all the release language came out, all of it in a rush, and it was done relatively quickly. And a week later, we were back into building tension and being manipulated by the powers that be. This time, the teacup was much larger. It's one of these massive teacups, and it was being filled from November 14th onward to the point where it started spilling over the lip on November 14th, and every drop we add to the teacup now comes over the lip. So our release and our spillage, if you will, of all of this language is happening on a daily basis for this whole period of time. Now, will the teacup turn over at the end of the January and spill it all at once? I don't know. Or will it just suddenly drain away and start filling back up with building tension language? I don't know. What I do forecast is that we'll shift out of this general release language dominating everything into our more, I hate to use the word, but more normal building tension language, oscillating with release language in this crocodile teeth fashion. So we will see an occurrence that something will change us on the latter half of the month, but how it will do so, I don't know. So in 2011, we can expect probably an economic kick in the release language, emptying more of our emotional tension in from our solar plexus on the 7th. And that will set us up for whatever comes on the following couple of weeks that then take us into the building tension language in the latter part of January. From there, we go this crocodile teeth fashion back to about March, and then we have a whole series of very sharp